The man turned into his street with the calm thought that it would be a quiet morning, his eyes heavy from a long night, his mind already picturing a cup of coffee on his porch while he looked at his collection of cars parked proudly in the driveway. But as he turned the corner his heart stopped. Lined up in front of his house were tow trucks, not one, not two, but several, their engines humming, their heavy steel arms already hooked onto his cars. The machines he had worked years to buy, each one shining under the morning sun, each one a symbol of his hard work and his love for cars. He slowed his truck, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel, his eyes burning as he took in the sight of strangers pulling chains and hooking his property as if it was theirs. And then he saw her, standing at the front with her arms crossed and that smug smile plastered on her face, HOA Karen. The woman who had been a thorn in his side since the day he moved into this neighborhood, her sharp eyes glinting with satisfaction, her lips curling with the kind of victory that only came when someone believed they had destroyed you completely. His blood boiled instantly, his chest heavy with anger. This was not a mistake. It was too perfect, too organized. This had been planned. This had been waiting for the moment he turned his back. He slammed the brakes, jumped out of his truck, and stormed toward his driveway, his boots hitting the pavement hard, his voice cutting through the noise. What the hell is going on here? The tow drivers froze for a moment, their hands mid-movement, but then they looked at him with blank expressions. One of them lifted a clipboard and said flatly, "We have orders from the HOA, repossession notice. These vehicles are in violation." The man snatched the paper and read it, his eyes narrowing at the ridiculous claims. Excessive vehicles cluttering community space. Improper parking that lowers property value. Words so vague they meant nothing, words Karen had scribbled just to dress up her power play. He dropped the paper back on the clipboard and stepped closer to Karen, his eyes burning. "You did this, didn't you?" he said through clenched teeth. Her smile widened, her chin lifted as she replied with mock sweetness. "Of course I did. You've treated this neighborhood like your personal showroom for too long. Rules are rules, and now it's time you learned what happens when you ignore them." She gestured toward his cars, her voice sharp and triumphant. "By tonight, they'll all be gone." His fists clenched at his sides, his anger bubbling. But he forced himself not to swing, not to shout, not yet. His cars stood there, his pride and joy, the result of years of labor, late nights, and sacrifices, and this woman thought she could erase all of it with one order. He walked past her and inspected the chains, the hooks digging into his tires, the straps around the rims. His jaw tightened. He turned back to the drivers. "If you move 1 inch with my property, you'll regret it." One of the drivers shrugged nervously. "Sir, we just follow orders. HOA signed off. We don't want trouble." His eyes narrowed. "You'll have more trouble than you can handle if you don't listen to me." But before they could answer, Karen cut in, laughing coldly. "They won't listen to you. They work for us, not for some man who thinks his cars are above the community. So either step aside or watch them drive away, because you can't stop what's already in motion." Her words dripped with poison. The neighbors had started to gather now, people peeking from behind curtains, some stepping onto porches, eyes wide, whispers spreading. They had seen Karen win before. They had seen her crush people with fines and threats. And now they were watching her try to strip this man of his cars. The man looked at them briefly, saw the mix of fear and curiosity in their faces, and he knew Karen was playing to her audience. She wanted to humiliate him, to break him publicly, but she didn't know the truth yet. She didn't know the one thing that made this game different. He stepped back slowly, his chest rising and falling, his anger controlled but his mind sharp. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb moving swiftly. He dialed a number he knew by heart. He lifted it to his ear, his voice calm, almost cold. "Activate hold on all trucks at Elmwood Drive. No vehicle moves without my order." The line was silent for a second. Then a firm voice replied, "Confirmed, hold activated." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The drivers looked at each other, confusion flashing in their eyes. Their radios crackled suddenly with the same message. "Hold orders confirmed, do not proceed." They froze in place, their hands pulling away from his cars, their eyes flicking between him and Karen. Karen's smile faltered, her brow furrowed. "What are you doing? Why did they stop?" she barked, her voice cracking slightly. The man stepped forward. His eyes locked on hers, his tone steady but sharp. "Because they don't work for you, Karen, they work for me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors leaned forward, whispers turned louder. Karen blinked rapidly, her mouth opening but no words coming out. The drivers stood back respectfully, waiting for his command. His chest swelled with the quiet satisfaction of the reveal. The truth was out now. The trap she thought she had set for him was about to snap shut on her. He let the silence hang, let her squirm in it. Then he spoke again, louder this time so the entire street could hear. You ordered my cars repossessed, but you forgot one thing. I own the towing company you hired. The words crashed into the air like thunder. Neighbors gasped loudly. Some even laughed in disbelief. Karen's face turned red, her eyes darting left and right, searching for a way out. But there was none. Her plan had collapsed in the very moment she thought she had one. And the man stood there, unshaken, unbroken, ready to turn her power play into her downfall. Karen's face twitched as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. The smugness drained for a moment, but pride forced her to straighten her back. She clapped her hands once and snapped at the drivers. Don't just stand there, finish the job, those cars need to go. But the drivers only looked at each other nervously. One shook his head slightly and stepped back. We can't. Orders came from higher up, hold is active, we're not allowed to move them. Karen's eyes widened, her voice rose sharp like a knife. I am the higher up, I'm the HOA president, and when I say move, you move. The driver swallowed and shook his head again. Sorry, company policy, we answer to the owner. His eyes flicked to the man, standing calm now with his phone in hand, and Karen's face turned red, her hands clenched. She spun toward him with fury. You think you're clever, don't you? Hiding behind your little company. But this won't last. I'll make sure every one of those cars is fined out of existence. I'll bury you in violations until you can't breathe. She hissed, her voice carrying across the street so the gathering neighbors could hear. The man didn't flinch. He let her words pour out, let her rage boil over. Then he simply lifted his phone again and tapped a button. The tow trucks lowered their arms, the chains unhooked, the clamps released. One by one his cars were freed. The sound of the heavy metal clanking back into place was like a victory drumbeat echoing in the morning air. The neighbors gasped. A few even chuckled quietly. Karen's threats had been silenced with a single gesture, but she wasn't done. Her pride couldn't let her stop. She stepped closer, her finger jabbing toward his chest. Don't think this makes you untouchable. This neighborhood has rules, and you're drowning in violations, multiple vehicles, improper parking, noise complaints. I can find 100 reasons to fine you and I will. I'll tie you up in paperwork until you beg me to take those cars away. Her voice cracked at the end, shrill with desperation. The man looked down at her finger, then slowly raised his eyes to hers. His tone calm and steady. You've already played your strongest card and it failed. The drivers won't touch my property without my order. The neighbors are watching, and the more you push the more you expose yourself. Do what you want with your fake violations. I'll answer each one with proof and law, and when the dust settles you won't be the one fining me, you'll be the one paying. His words landed heavy, her face froze for a second, her lips trembling before she forced a laugh, a harsh, brittle sound that convinced no one. She turned sharply to the neighbors as if trying to reclaim her stage. Don't let him fool you. This is about community standards, not some childish game. If we allow one man to break rules, what's next? Chaos, lowered property value, we all suffer. But the neighbors didn't nod like they used to. Instead they shifted uncomfortably, some whispered to each other. One old man muttered, "Looks more like you're the one making a scene." Karen's eyes snapped to him, her face darkening, but she bit her tongue. She couldn't scold a neighbor in public while her authority was already cracking. She turned back to the man, her voice low now, venom dripping from every word. Enjoy your little win, but I'll be back, and next time you won't be so lucky. She spun on her heel and stormed toward her house, her heels clicking like angry gunshots on the pavement. The tow trucks idled silently for a moment, then one by one drove away, leaving his cars lined up in perfect condition. Gleaming under the sunlight, the man stood still on his porch, his arms crossed, his chest steady. He watched her retreat with cold eyes. The crowd slowly dispersed, neighbors whispering, some shaking their heads, some smirking, a few nodding toward him in quiet support. He didn't smile, not yet, because he knew this was only the beginning. Karen's pride had been wounded but not destroyed. She would come back harder. But now he was ready, the secret was out. The tow company was his. Her strongest move had been turned into her greatest humiliation, and the game had changed. He whispered to himself as he looked at his cars, safe and untouchable. This was just round one, Karen, and I'm still standing. The next morning the man woke to find another envelope shoved under his door, the paper thick with the HOA logo stamped boldly at the top. His stomach tightened but his hands were steady as he opened it. Inside was a list of violations, not one or two but a full page filled with petty complaints, faded tire marks on his driveway, a supposed oil stain near the curb, the height of his garden fence, even the color of his garage door was listed as non-compliant. He shook his head slowly, his jaw tightening. This was Karen's next move. She had lost the tow truck battle but she had returned with a flood of paper and fines. The kind of attack she believed no one could withstand. His eyes narrowed as he read each line, most of them lies, a few exaggerated, all of them designed to bury him, to drown him in so much nonsense that he would have no energy left to fight. He folded the letter neatly and placed it on the growing stack of HOA threats on his table. Then he sat back, breathing slowly. Thinking, Karen was arrogant, but she was also predictable. She thought throwing rules around like weapons would scare him. But she didn't realize every piece of paper she sent was just more proof of her harassment. And he was collecting all of it. He pulled out his phone and began snapping clear photos of each letter, filing them into a folder marked evidence. He scanned them one by one, then flipped through the binder of property agreements he had been studying. The clause about forced sales was still highlighted, but now he was looking for more, something else Karen might have missed, something that would corner her further. His eyes landed on a section about abuse of authority. Words that gave homeowners the right to file claims if the HOA acted outside reasonable grounds. His lips curved slightly. This was her mistake. She had stepped too far and the law had written protections for people like him. His phone buzzed suddenly. A text from Maria, the neighbor who had helped him scan documents earlier. It read, "I saw Karen last night. She was bragging to 2 board members that you won't last. She said she'll fine you until you crack." The man exhaled slowly, his chest tightening. It didn't surprise him. Karen had always treated the neighborhood like a stage. But now her arrogance was giving him witnesses. He typed back, "Thank you. Keep notes if you hear more." Maria replied instantly, "I will. People are tired of her. They just need someone to push back." He looked at those words for a long moment. People are tired, yes, but they were afraid. For years Karen had ruled with fear, threatening fines, threatening lawsuits, and most folded quickly to avoid the stress. But now they had seen someone stand up to her and win, and it had lit a spark. He stood and walked outside, the morning sun glinting off his cars parked neatly in the driveway. His pride swelled quietly as he saw them untouched, safe, and untouchable. He knew Karen was watching. Her blinds barely moved, but he caught the flicker of her shadow. He almost smiled, because she thought burying him in fines would break him. But all she had done was hand him more weapons to use against her. As he stood there, 2 neighbors strolled past. One nodded at him, whispering, "Good job yesterday." The other chuckled softly. Karen looked like she swallowed a lemon. Their words were quiet but their eyes carried respect, something they had never dared to show openly before. He gave them a polite nod and said nothing more, letting the silence hold his strength. Later that afternoon he visited the lawyer again, sliding the new stack of violations across the desk. The lawyer skimmed through them, frowning, then looked up and said firmly, "This isn't standard enforcement, this is harassment. She's gone too far. If you keep building your case you can turn this whole HOA upside down." The man nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't want just survival anymore. He wanted Karen exposed. He wanted her stripped of her power so no one else would suffer. That night as the street lights flickered on, he sat at his desk writing a timeline. From the first petty fine to the tow truck fiasco, to this avalanche of fake violations. Each detail neatly recorded, each document filed. His wall was slowly becoming a map of Karen's downfall. Outside the night was quiet, but inside his house a war was being documented line by line. He knew Karen thought she was winning again, that she could drown him in rules, but he whispered to himself with a cold calm, "You're just giving me the rope, Karen, and when this ends you'll be the one hanging from it." The deadline Karen had set in her fake order loomed closer. The air in the neighborhood grew heavier as whispers spread. Some neighbors avoided his eyes, others looked at him with quiet curiosity, waiting to see if he would bend or break under the mountain of fines. But inside his house the man was steady, his table covered with files, papers, photos, and notes. Every letter Karen had sent was stacked neatly, every violation carefully marked. His phone full of recordings, the timeline of her harassment written clearly in his own handwriting. He knew Karen thought this would drown him, but it only made his case stronger. He spent long nights with coffee mugs piling on the counter, reading every line of his property agreement again, studying each phrase like a soldier studying a map before battle. He found not just one clause but several, protections written to prevent HOA abuse, words that Karen had either ignored or never bothered to read, and each one was like a sword in his hands. The day of the HOA meeting arrived sooner than he expected, the sky gray with clouds, the air heavy with tension. He walked to the hall carrying his thick folder under his arm, his steps slow but steady. When he entered the room, the atmosphere was sharp. Neighbors sat scattered in their usual seats, some whispering, some glancing nervously at him. At the front stood Karen with her board, her face painted with a confident smile but her eyes twitching ever so slightly. She clutched her stack of papers like a queen holding her crown. The chair cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. They started with small matters, trash collection, landscaping. But the weight in the air was clear. Everyone was waiting for the storm. Finally Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp and loud. Next on the agenda, repeated violations by one homeowner, multiple cars cluttering the street, unsafe storage of vehicles, lowering community standards. Her words came like darts, aimed to shame, to crush. She looked directly at him, her smirk wide as if daring him to fight. The neighbors murmured but no one spoke. Silence was a weapon. But today he would not let it protect her. He stood slowly, his chair scraping across the floor, the sound making the room fall quiet. All eyes turned to him. He carried his folder to the front and placed it firmly on the table, then looked at the board, his voice calm but clear. You say I am in violation, but what you have sent me is not enforcement. It is harassment. He opened the folder and pulled out the first set of letters, holding them up high. Here are every single notice, every fine, every threat I have received over the years, each one more ridiculous than the last, each one aimed not at community standards but at me personally. Gasps spread as he laid them flat. Then he pulled out the county development plan, placing it beside the stack. And here is the reason why, this plan, this project that would erase my property to build your so-called luxury complex. This is not about rules. This is about greed. And you thought you could force me out with lies. Karen's face stiffened, her lips pressed tight, her hand gripping the table. But he didn't stop. He pulled out the highlighted clause and read it aloud, his voice echoing in the silent hall. If a homeowner is forced to sell under duress, the association is liable for damages and must lease the property back at triple rate. Those are your own words, signed in this agreement. The room erupted with whispers. Neighbors leaned forward, their eyes wide, some nodding, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen slammed her hand on the table, her voice cracking. That clause doesn't apply. It's outdated, irrelevant. Don't listen to him. This is just a distraction. But before she could say more, the man pressed play on his phone. The recording of her voice filled the room, sharp and shrill from the day she tried to force the tow trucks. The violations don't matter anymore. You're out of compliance. The community needs progress. If you won't leave peacefully, the board will take legal steps. The neighbors gasped again, louder this time. Some even muttered angrily, "She said that. She lied to us." The man let the recording play, then stopped it and looked around the room, his eyes calm but piercing. You all heard her. This was never about community rules. This was about power, intimidation, and profit, and I will not be bullied into giving up my home. Silence fell heavy. The board members looked pale, shifting uncomfortably. One even dropped his pen. Karen's face burned red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The man placed his hand on his stack of papers and said firmly, "You have 72 hours left on your so-called deadline, but I promise you this, if you push me any further you will not only lose this fight, you will pay for every step of it." The room sat frozen. The neighbor's eyes no longer filled with fear but with something else, doubt in Karen, respect for him. The balance was shifting, and as he returned to his seat he knew the countdown was no longer his enemy, it was hers. Every tick of the clock dragging her closer to her downfall. Karen did not sleep after that meeting. The man could tell because her blinds were lit late into the night, her shadow pacing back and forth like a caged animal. By morning she was out early, striding from house to house with a folder in her hands. Her voice raised as she knocked on doors, trying to convince neighbors that he was dangerous, that he was ruining their community. She spoke in a shrill tone that carried across the street. He thinks he's above the rules. His mocking all of us. If he gets away with this, then none of us are safe. But the faces of the neighbors had changed. Some nodded politely just to get rid of her. Others closed their doors quickly, and some even shook their heads in open disbelief. The man watched silently from his porch. His arms folded, his eyes cold. He knew desperation when he saw it. Karen's power had cracked and now she was scrambling to glue it back together. Later that day he found another thick envelope shoved into his mailbox. This time stamped "Final Notice" in bold red letters. His jaw tightened as he pulled it out. Flipping through the pages, it was a stack of fines, not hundreds but thousands of dollars. Every small complaint Karen could imagine was written in official language: noise disturbance, lawn violation, improper use of property, even failure to maintain driveway paint. He laughed bitterly. The driveway paint was fresh, his lawn perfect, his house maintained. She wasn't even pretending to be fair anymore. This was open war. He carried the papers inside and laid them on the table, then picked up his phone and called his lawyer, his voice calm but edged with steel. "She's crossed the line again. I've got a stack of fake fines, all dated within 24 hours. She's trying to bleed me dry." The lawyer listened and then said firmly, "Good, keep every page. This is more proof. The more extreme she gets, the easier it will be to prove harassment and abuse of power. Her desperation is your weapon." The man nodded, already stacking the new papers into his evidence pile. The tower of documents growing taller by the day. He felt no fear now, only a steady resolve. The clock that once pressed on him now pressed on her. That evening as the sun set, the man heard Karen shouting again. This time in her own driveway, her voice sharp and frantic on the phone. "No, I don't care what the lawyer says. We'll push him out. I don't care how. Do you understand? He cannot win." She slammed the phone down hard enough that the sound echoed across the street. The neighbors heard, their curtains twitched, and the whispers spread faster. The man smiled faintly, because every loud word she spoke was another crack in her own foundation. 2 days later another HOA meeting was called. Smaller but more heated, Karen stormed in with her stack of fines and waved them in the air, her voice shrill. "This man is a danger to the community. He refuses to follow any rules. He disrespects all of you. He mocks this board." She expected nods, expected support, but instead the room was silent. Some neighbors frowned, others crossed their arms, one even muttered, "He hasn't hurt anyone. You're the one causing trouble." Karen's face went red, her hands trembling. She slammed the papers down on the table. "These are violations, legal, enforceable, undeniable." But before she could continue, the man rose calmly, pulled out his phone, and pressed play. The recording of her screaming in her driveway filled the room. "He cannot win. I don't care how. Push him out." The words rang sharp and ugly. The neighbors gasped. Some shook their heads, others whispered angrily. Karen's eyes widened, her face pale. She lunged forward as if to grab his phone. But he stepped back smoothly, his voice calm and cutting. "You just admitted this is not about rules. It's about your pride, your need to control. And now everyone here has heard it for themselves." The room fell silent, heavy with the weight of truth. Karen stood frozen, her mouth open but no words coming out. The board members looked down at their papers, ashamed and cornered. The neighbors whispered louder, some even glaring openly at her. The man tucked his phone back into his pocket and said firmly, "These fines are fake, these threats are harassment, and this board has a choice: continue to follow her and pay the price, or finally stand for what's right." His words cut through the hall like a blade, and this time the silence was not fear, it was thought, reflection. The neighbors were no longer her shield, they were turning, and she could feel it. Her face flushed deep red, her hands trembling as she tried to collect her papers, her voice breaking as she muttered, "This isn't over." Before storming out of the hall, her heels pounding like angry drums, the man stood tall, his chest steady, and whispered under his breath, "No, Karen, for you it's just beginning." The neighborhood felt different after that meeting. The air that was once heavy with Karen's shadow now carried something new. Whispers had turned into conversations. Quiet complaints had turned into bold voices. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact now nodded at the man when he walked past. Some even stopped to speak. An older gentleman leaned on his cane and said, "You gave us courage, son. We were scared of her for too long." A young couple whispered, "She fined us for painting our shutters the wrong shade of green. We paid because we were afraid, but now we see what she really is." Their words gave him strength. He realized Karen's power had never been real. It had always been built on fear, and fear was crumbling fast. That evening he sat on his porch with his cars lined proudly in the driveway, polished and gleaming. The same cars Karen had tried to take. the same cars that had exposed her as a liar. He sipped his coffee slowly, his eyes fixed across the street at Karen's house, her blinds drawn, her porch light off. She hadn't shown her face since storming out of the hall, but he could feel her anger, like a storm bottled up behind those curtains. Suddenly his phone buzzed, a text from Maria. "You should know, Karen was at my door again, begging me to sign a petition against you. I told her no, others told her no too, she's desperate." He smirked faintly, reading it twice. He replied simply, "Good, keep notes. Every word helps." The next morning another letter arrived, slipped under his door, this one shakier, the wording rushed, claiming he had broken community spirit and damaged HOA authority. Nothing concrete, nothing that held weight, just Karen's anger spilled onto paper. He folded it neatly and placed it on top of his growing evidence pile. Her desperation was giving him more weapons every day. Later that afternoon the HOA called another emergency meeting. The hall filled again, this time packed tighter. Neighbors leaned against walls, some stood near the door, waiting. Karen entered late, her face pale but her eyes hard. She slammed a stack of papers onto the table and shouted before anyone could speak. "This man is destroying our neighborhood. He's turning you all against your own board. If you don't stop him we will all suffer. Property values will fall. Buyers will run. Chaos will take over." Her voice cracked, shrill, desperate. But instead of fear she was met with murmurs. One man stood up, his voice strong. "No. Karen, you're the chaos. You fined me for a cracked window. You fined my sister for her dog barking. We paid because we thought we had to. But we don't anymore." Another neighbor chimed in. "You lied to us about his cars. You lied about violations. We saw the proof." The room filled with voices, louder and bolder than ever before. "Enough, Karen. We're tired of this. You don't scare us anymore." Karen's eyes widened, her face flushed red. She banged the table with her palm. "Silence. I am the HOA president. You will respect my authority." But the voices didn't stop. They grew louder, stronger, and for the first time Karen's command carried no weight. She looked around the room and saw no bowed heads, no submissive nods, only angry eyes and crossed arms. The man stood slowly, his calm presence cutting through the noise. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was steady and firm. "Karen, your time is ending. You used fear to control. But fear doesn't work anymore. Not on me. Not on them. You tried to take my cars. You buried me in fines. And now you're drowning in your own lies. Every paper you send. Every word you shout. I keep it. I record it. And soon it will all be used against you." The silence that followed was heavy, not for him, but for her. Because everyone knew the truth now. Karen's lips trembled, her eyes darted wildly. She tried to speak but her words died in her throat. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their faces pale. One whispered, "Maybe we should reconsider." Another muttered, "This has gone too far." Karen's body stiffened. She grabbed her papers and stuffed them into her folder with shaking hands, muttering, "This isn't over," before storming out again, her heels echoing down the hall. This time no one followed her, no one defended her. The man stood tall in the middle of the room, his neighbors looking at him not with fear but with trust. And he knew then that the tide had turned completely. Karen's reign was breaking, her threats empty, her voice hollow, and the countdown that once threatened him was now ticking only for her, each passing hour dragging her closer to her downfall. The morning after that explosive meeting the man knew Karen would not sit quietly in her house licking her wounds. She had too much pride, too much obsession with control. And sure enough by mid-morning a white SUV with the HOA logo pulled up outside his home. Two board members stepped out looking nervous, and Karen followed behind them, her folder clutched so tightly that her knuckles were white. She walked up his driveway with quick sharp steps, her heels stabbing the pavement, her face stiff. With a fake smile, neighbors peeked out again, some even stood openly on their lawns, tired of hiding. Karen raised her voice so everyone could hear. "We are here on official business. This homeowner has failed to comply and we are filing for emergency seizure of his property and vehicles." Her words rang out like a desperate battle cry. The board members shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The man stepped onto his porch, calm, collected, his arms folded, his eyes locked on hers. He asked, simply, "On what grounds?" Karen pulled out a thick packet of papers, shaking slightly as she held them up. "On grounds of repeated violations, public disturbance, and obstruction of community authority, the board has signed this order." She waved the papers like a weapon, her eyes darting to the crowd as if hoping their silence would back her up. But the man took one slow step forward and said clearly, "Read it out loud then, every line, so everyone can hear what you're accusing me of." Karen froze, her lips parting but no words coming out. She glanced at the board members. They avoided her eyes. One muttered, "Maybe this isn't the best way." She snapped, "Read it," shoving the packet at him. But the man did not take it. Instead he pulled his phone from his pocket, unlocked it, and pressed play. The street filled with the sound of her own voice from the last meeting, her shrill words echoing. "This isn't about rules. I don't care how. Push him out. He cannot win." The crowd gasped. Some even laughed bitterly. One woman shouted, "So you admit it, it was never about rules." Another neighbor crossed his arms and said, "You've lied to us for years, Karen." The recording kept playing, her anger, her threats, every word caught clearly, and her face drained of color. She reached out as if she could snatch the phone from his hand, but he stepped back, his voice cold and firm. "You brought your lies to my driveway, but the truth was already here. You said this wasn't about rules. You said it yourself. This is about your pride, your greed, your control, and now everyone knows it." The board members looked pale. One finally spoke. "We can't support this. This isn't legal." The other nodded quickly. "We could be liable. This has gone too far." Karen's eyes went wide, her lips trembling. She shouted desperately, "No, you can't back out now. We promised the developers. They're counting on us. If he stays, we lose everything." Her words slipped out before she could stop them. The crowd erupted again, angry. Shouts rising. "So it was about developers. You tried to sell us out. You nearly destroyed this neighborhood." Karen realized too late what she had confessed. Her folder slipped from her hands and the papers scattered across the driveway. Her power crumbled right there in the sunlight as the neighbors closed in with angry voices. No longer whispers, no longer afraid. The man raised his hand to quiet them, his voice calm but commanding. "She has admitted the truth. She tried to repossess my cars, bury me in fines, seize my home, not for rules but for money, for her own pride. But I recorded every word, I saved every letter, and I will take it all to court if I have to. And when I do, this HOA won't own me, it will owe me." The crowd fell silent for a moment, his words sinking in. Then one by one the neighbors nodded, some clapped quietly, others murmured, "We're with you." Karen's knees seemed to wobble, her face red and pale all at once. She bent down frantically to grab her scattered papers, but no one helped her, not even the board members. They turned and walked away quickly, muttering excuses, leaving her alone in the middle of the street. She stuffed the papers into her folder and shouted weakly, "This isn't over." But the words rang hollow. No one believed her anymore. The man stepped back onto his porch, calm and steady, the neighbor's eyes following him with respect. Karen stumbled back to her SUV, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, then sped away down the street, her engine roaring like her pride trying to escape the humiliation. The man stood in the evening light, his cars safe, his neighbors on his side, his evidence stronger than ever, and he whispered under his breath, "No, Karen, for you it's already over." 2 days after Karen's humiliating scene in the street, the HOA called for an emergency board session. The notice was delivered quietly, almost nervously, and by evening the community hall was packed tighter than ever before. Neighbors who never bothered to attend now filled the chairs and even stood along the walls, the air buzzing with whispers and the sharp tension of something about to break. The man walked in calmly with his thick folder under his arm, his phone in his pocket ready if needed. He took a seat near the front but slightly to the side, watching, waiting. Karen entered a few minutes later, her steps fast, her folder clutched like a lifeline, her face painted with forced confidence but her eyes darting nervously. The board members sat stiffly at the long table, their papers stacked neatly but their hands restless. The chair cleared his throat and tried to bring order. "We are here to address ongoing issues with recent enforcement actions." But before he could continue, Karen jumped in, her voice high and sharp. "Yes, we must address the danger this man poses to our community. He is undermining our authority, turning neighbors against us. And if we do not act decisively, this HOA will collapse." She slammed her folder on the table for effect, but instead of the usual nods she was met with silence. The neighbors shifted in their seats, some crossed their arms, some smirked faintly. One older woman whispered loud enough for many to hear, "Collapse came from you, not him." Karen's face tightened. She pointed across the room at the man. He is manipulating all of you, playing with loopholes, hiding behind his towing company. He is making a fool of this entire community. The man rose slowly. His chair scraping the floor, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. He pulled out a stack of letters and laid them on the front table. These are every fine, every notice, every fake violation she has sent me in the last 2 weeks alone. All baseless, all harassment, and here. He lifted his phone and pressed play. The room filled again with Karen's shrill recording. I don't care how, push him out, he cannot win. Gasps and murmurs swept through the hall. Neighbors shook their heads. Some muttered angrily, she said that herself. So it was personal. Karen's face went pale, her mouth opened but nothing came out. The man then pulled out the county development proposal, spreading the pages for all to see. And here is the real reason. A planned luxury project that requires my land. She knew this and used her power to push me out. Not for rules, not for order, but for greed. The room erupted louder this time, angry voices. Neighbors standing, pointing at Karen. You lied to us. You betrayed this neighborhood. We trusted you. Karen shouted over them, her voice cracking. No, you don't understand. I was protecting our future. This project would have raised property values. It was for all of us. But her words only poured gasoline on the fire. People jeered. One man shouted, protecting yourself. You mean, another woman added, you wanted us gone if it meant money in your pocket. The board members looked sick. One rubbed his temples. Another whispered too. The chair, finally the chair stood and raised his hands for quiet, his voice heavy. This board has reviewed the evidence, and it is clear lines have been crossed, actions were taken without proper authority, threats were made, and the integrity of this HOA has been compromised. Karen's eyes went wide, she slammed her palm on the table. No, you can't do this, I am the president, I make the rules. But the chair shook his head slowly, not anymore. Then he turned to the room. We will hold a vote of confidence from the board and from the community, all in favor of removing Karen from her position as HOA president. Raise your hands. In unison hands shot up, first the board, then one by one the neighbors, until the hall looked like a forest of raised arms. Karen spun around, her face red and pale all at once, her lips trembling. You can't do this, you need me, you'll regret it. But the sight of all those hands broke her. The chair spoke firmly. It is decided, effective. Immediately, Karen is removed as HOA president. The room erupted, cheers, applause, laughter, relief. The weight that had hung over them for years lifted in a single moment. Karen stumbled back, clutching her folder to her chest, her eyes wide and empty. She backed toward the door, muttering, "This isn't fair, this isn't fair," before rushing out, slamming the door behind her. The man sat quietly through the noise, his face calm, his chest steady. He had not needed to shout. He had not needed to fight with fists. He had only needed truth and patience. And now Karen's reign was over. The neighbors surrounded him, shaking his hand, patting his shoulder, some even thanking him with tears in their eyes. You freed us. We should have stood up long ago. You showed us we had a choice. The board apologized, promising to repair the damage and restore fairness. The man nodded politely but said little. He knew the real victory was not in their words. It was in the silence of Karen's absence, her voice gone, her shadow lifted, and the community finally free. The night after Karen was voted out, the neighborhood was quieter than it had been in years. No more shouting from her porch. No more envelopes slipped under doors filled with threats. No more fear. But for the man, the fight wasn't finished. He knew the damage she caused had to be addressed, and the board had to be held accountable for allowing her to abuse her power for so long. The next morning he walked into the HOA office with his thick folder of evidence, the same one he had been building piece by piece, and placed it on the table in front of the remaining board members, his voice calm but sharp. This isn't just about removing her. This is about responsibility. Every fake fine, every violation, every threat is documented here, and unless this association makes it right, I will take all of it to court. The board members looked at each other nervously. One cleared his throat and admitted, "We let her run. Unchecked for too long. We didn't question her because we were afraid of her temper. But the evidence is undeniable. We have no defense if this goes to trial." Another spoke quickly. "What do you want? What will make this right?" The man leaned forward, his eyes steady. "First, every fine, every violation she filed against me and against anyone else must be erased immediately. Second, restitution must be paid for the harassment and damages caused. And third, the clause in your own agreement will be enforced, the one she tried to use against me. The association will now pay me triple rent for every day you attempted to force me off my land. Silence fell heavy in the room. The board members shifted in their chairs. They knew he was right. The clause was there in black and white, signed and sealed years ago, and Karen's actions had triggered it. One of them whispered, "That will bankrupt the HOA." The man leaned back slowly, his tone cold. "Then you should have thought of that. Before you let her wage a personal war on me. I didn't write the rules, you did, I'm just following them." After hours of tense discussion, the board finally caved, signing an agreement that not only cleared his record but bound the HOA to pay him restitution. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Whispers turned to cheers. Neighbors shook his hand, some hugged him. One elderly woman with tears in her eyes said, "For years she made our lives miserable. You gave us our voices back." The man nodded quietly, his satisfaction not loud but deep. Later that week the first payment arrived, a check that carried with it not just money but proof that the HOA now answered to him. The very people who had tried to crush him were now tied to him financially. Every month they would pay him, triple the rate of what they once tried to steal. And the irony was delicious. Karen's face was not seen in the neighborhood anymore. Her house went dark, the blinds stayed closed. Some said she was hiding. Others whispered she was planning revenge. But her power was gone, her crown shattered. The neighbors no longer feared her name. Instead they looked to the man with respect. His cars still gleamed proudly in his driveway, untouchable, a symbol of his defiance and victory. One evening as he stood outside polishing one of them, a group of neighbors gathered, not to complain, not to whisper, but to thank him openly. They offered to form a new board, fair and transparent, one that would never allow another Karen to rise again. He nodded, agreeing to help guide them but not control them, because his fight was never about power, it was about justice. As the sun set and the sky turned gold, he looked at his home, his land, his cars lined like soldiers, and he whispered to himself, "She thought she could take everything from me in 72 hours. Now she'll spend the rest of her life remembering that I own what she could never touch." The battle was over, the war won, and the man had turned Karen's weapon into her defeat, forever.